All right, yes, let's get started. So a warm welcome, everyone. My name is Melinda. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm co-hosting today with Krithi, who is going to share our slides. Hi, thank you. All right, and welcome to TPG Demo Day. Both of us are on the leadership committee of Technologists for the Public Good, and we're really excited to welcome you to this one, which is our first demo day, a series that we've started to highlight the work of our friends and colleagues in the space who are doing really important and groundbreaking work, but not always highly visible work. So this series provides a space for us to share together, elevate new voices, also hear from seasoned practitioners, and just let the community benefit from the lessons we're all learning as we work to improve how government serves the people. So as most of you may know, just a brief introduction to TPG. It's a professional organization made of practitioners from many disciplines and backgrounds, but we're all involved in work that is all about building better and more equitable public systems and services. So since we're all bringing different perspectives and roles and experiences today, the icebreaker is to type into the chat, just so we can sort of see the mix of folks that are here, one sentence about what it is that you do. So think a little bit outside the box if you'd like. Be creative, maybe think a little bit beyond your formal role or title, and just summarize what's the main heart and purpose of your daily work. Kind of like, what is your why that gets you excited about your job? That puts a little different spin on it. I got to think of mine now. All right. As those introductions are coming in and we can see a little bit about who's here, we'll do a couple of housekeeping items. So as I said earlier, feel free to leave video on or turn video on if you're comfortable to. It's great to see everyone's faces and who's here today, but do please stay muted except for Q&A after the talk. We will have a chance to do some questions via chat or come off the mic if you wish. So while people are continuing to put in their introductions, let's take a quick look at our agenda today. So we'll introduce our special guest. We're so excited to have Victor Udoewa. And Victor's going to talk to us today about his work in radical participatory research and design. After that, we'll have some time for questions and comments with Victor, as I mentioned. And then we'll do a short debrief session in breakout rooms. So we'll do small groups so you can connect maybe more personally with some of the folks that are here and reflect about maybe some of the ways we can take home some learnings or practices from what we hear today. And as far as timing goes, this event is pretty close to 1 hour, but after some timing calculations, we think we'll be extending to possibly about 10 minutes past the hour as we finish up. But we hope you will stick around because after the breakout rooms, we are going to have an optional group screenshot photo at the end so we can all remember this fun time we had together. And we'll also share some information about how you can stay connected with TPG and get involved with more events coming up this year and become a member if you're not already. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about Victor, our wonderful guest today, Victor Udoewa, who is currently serving as CTO, CXO, and Service Design Lead of the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer Programs at NASA. And he was previously the Director of Strategy at 18F, which, as many of you know, is a digital services agency within the federal government. While Victor was there, he led the digital strategy practice and served as a designer and strategist on projects. Prior to that, Victor worked as a global education instructional designer and training development specialist at Google, where he designed learning products and services for people in low to middle income countries around the world. And some other things I know about Victor as his former colleague is that he is a humble, empathetic, and passionate human who loves spending time with his family and works tirelessly to make the world a more equitable place for everyone. Victor is not afraid to ask hard questions and challenge the status quo. And today he's going to share with us about the practice of radical participatory research and design, which definitely prompts hard questions and challenges us to think differently about the work we do as professionals in public interest technology. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Victor, and thank you so much for sharing your time and being here today. We're very excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I'll talk a little bit while you please will enable my ability to share the screen because it's not allowing me. It says it's disabled. Yeah, it's good to see some of you that I recognize. I didn't expect all of you. Some of you may say, oh, I've heard some of this before, so I apologize. But this is more for people as an introduction and a mix. I think when I've talked before about radical participatory research and other talks where I've talked about radical participatory design, bringing those two together. But it's good to see friendly faces and people who I've interacted with in different spaces and places. It still says disabled, just letting you know.
Go ahead and try now.
Okay. Yay, it's working. Okay. Can you see it now? Yeah? No?
I see a dark screen.
Yeah, it does it sometimes.
There it is.
Oh, you do see it. Okay. All right. You people always come here and take and take and take, and I never see a single thing change. Why are you here? These were the words that greeted me upon entering a particular community in north central India and trying to begin a conversation with a gentleman who was squatting on the ground. You see, he connected me with a long tradition, or should I say history, of extractive research and practices that always took from them, but never gave anything back to the community. In fact, it never honored self-determination, self-reliance, or self-governance. And so we in this field of technology and civic innovation have some reckoning to do. We have to decide, are we going to do better than we have done in the past? And if so, how might we change to be better? So welcome, I'm Victor, as Melinda said, and I'll be talking a little bit about radical participatory design. I come from Washington, D.C., not originally, of course, but it is the land of the Nako-Chonk. They are a people group who fled to a small, tiny island, Theodore Roosevelt Island, in the Potomac River due to persecution. And due to further persecution, then joined a neighboring tribe, the Piscataway in Maryland, and together they both fled to Pennsylvania. They were a people group before the colonists arrived, when the colonists were here, and still today, and I honor and acknowledge them and this land on which I live and move and have my being. Now, land acknowledgements don't change a single thing about the allocation of resources. What they do change, though, they work at the level of mythology, right? In mythology, remember, it doesn't matter if it's true or false in a scientific or enlightenment sense. What matters is if it's living or dead. And there is very much a living mythology around participatory design and work and the history of participatory work in design and research. So join me as we unsettle, unhouse, unearth, or rather decolonize that history of participatory research and design. So if you ask someone, well, when did people, Homo sapiens first appear on the scene? The earliest bones we found are around 300,000 years ago. And they say, well, okay, well, when did participatory design start? Most people will say in the 1970s in Scandinavia with this thing called collaborative design. Some people might tell you, oh, Carl Lin, the father of participatory architecture, and he built this, participatory architecture center in Philadelphia in 1960, the same year that Jane Jacobs wrote this beautiful book that critiqued the centralized planning model and planted the seeds for participatory planning movement. Some people might even say in the 1940s with some of the European scholars who began writing about participatory action research. But if you notice on the right, the 1940s era, the 1960s era, the 1970s era are all on top of each other. That's because we're saying for 300,000 years, there's been no participatory work up until the 1940s or 60s or 70s. Well, if, I don't know, there's lots of definitions of design, but if design could mean, in one definition, taking in, receiving, gathering information, coming up with at least one idea, and then doing the idea, implementing it, then I'm willing to bet there's actually lots of examples of participatory design way before the 1940s. Travel with me to 13th century West Africa, when communities were trying to deal with the challenge of how to remember. And they chose an embodied approach, embodying a design of the griot. The griot was the oral historian of the community, the social memory, using fables and songs and poems and epic tales and narratives and proverbs. They were able to touch that part of the human psyche, the human condition, which is susceptible to story. And using all these different tools, not only help the griot to remember, but help those who are listening to better plant that history in their hearts and their minds. We could go to ancient Mesopotamia as civilizations were beginning to build and more people were gathering together, and they were trying to figure out with this new farming, how do we feed all of these people? Sometimes if it rained too much, the crops were ruined. If it didn't rain enough, the crops were ruined. And so they built these large storage basins, and they built these, what we call today, canals that led from those storage basins to the different farms. And if there wasn't enough rain, that's fine. They could lead the water to the farms. And if there was too much rain, they built up the sides of the banks to hold the water back. A community answering the call of a particular situation in their place. We could go to, this is true in many countries, but I'm going to use India as an example, where you were dealing with the situation of how do you conserve medicinal plant knowledge? They came up with 3 different designs. The first was traditional systems of medicines. That's where you actually encode medicinal plant knowledge in ancient scriptures and texts. The second was folk medicine, right? Which you learn by doing and you pass it on through oral tradition. And the third was an embodied and expert approach in which you embodied medicinal plant knowledge in a spiritual or shamanic healer. And that person would pass it on through apprenticeships. But even if you go back to when traditional systems of medicines first occurred, right? They were just institutionalizing or codifying folk medicine, which had existed thousands of years before that. So when we go back to this timeline, we realize actually there is no separation between the start of communities and the start of participatory work. There have always been people doing participatory work. In fact, it's even before Homo sapiens, right? We can look at examples of the beautiful emergent designs with trees and mycelium, which sends signals below ground where trees can warn each other and advise each other of impending danger, and oak trees locking roots below for greater resilience from hurricanes and natural disasters, and oak and ash and mangrove being one root and coming up and sprouting up multiple trees. Design, participatory design especially, has always been there. You might want to ask the same question about participatory research, right? So you can just say same thing, 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens appeared. But when did participatory research come about? Well, some people would say in the Southern tradition, you have Paulo Freire, right, in the 1970s. This beautiful book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which if you haven't read, I really recommend that you read it. And some people might still say again from the Northern tradition, the 1940s, with the participatory action research models. But wait, does that even make sense? What if research is really just receiving, gathering, collecting information, organizing information, synthesizing, analyzing, transmitting, communicating, storytelling the information? But wait a minute, there are numerous examples of people doing that, especially in participatory ways, way before the 1940s. Travel back with me to West Africa, or travel today with me to Suriname. This picture comes from Suriname. In West Africa, with the Atlantic slave trade, you'd have these slave traders going in and raiding villages or inciting other tribes to raid other tribes, and they get these prisoners of war and march them down to the coast and store them in slave castles and put them on ships and cross the Atlantic and then bring them to the New World, whatever percentage were left after all the many deaths along the way. And when this was happening in preparation, or as the raids were going on, or getting ready, or when you heard word of it, sometimes the women would take seeds the different kinds of seeds, but often rice seeds, and put them in the hair and begin to braid them as a way of storing information, storing memory, a way of preserving their culture, of passing down a heritage. And when they arrived in the New World, after a hard day's work of working for the slave master, one of the things they would do in an act that today we would call participatory asset mapping, what do we have? They'd say to themselves, what do we have that we can grow for ourselves? And the seeds are one of the things they could do that with. We could go to ancient Greece where midwives were trying to figure out methods of birth control. And what did they do? They went and spoke to animal herders, and animal herders said, well, when these animals eat this food or eat that food, they tend not to give birth as much. And so they went and got that information, and it was transmitted to the midwives from the animal herders. We could go back even before, when we think of Homo sapiens, you go back 2.6 million years ago to early humans, and they take these stones, right, and they would hit the stones, and that's the picture you see on the left, these sharpened stones, and then that evolved into stone hand axes, right, which I don't have a picture of, but that was like 1.6 million years ago, and that evolved to these tools called knapping tools around 200 to 400,000 years ago. And then on the right you can see there these cutting blades that evolved around 80,000 to 40,000 years ago, and it went on from there to sharp micro blades 11 to 17,000 years ago, and then celts and chisels and axes around 12,000 years ago. And all of this was researched through experimentation in participation with the community. So when we look at that timeline again, we realize, well, wait a minute, participatory research was always there throughout the history of communities and even before whomever we can think of, right? We could even go to the notions of research justice that say, wait a minute, one of the reasons that we think that it just popped up in the 40s or the 60s or the 70s is because we're only thinking of mainstream institutional knowledge, which in the Western world is prioritized above other kinds. But research justice says that mainstream institutional knowledge is equal to and alongside lived experiential knowledge, cultural knowledge, and spiritual knowledge. Well, if that's true, then it begins to transform what research even means. Instead of research being investigation, it transforms the meaning of research to a pluriverse of meanings. And instead of research being an investigation to establish a fact or reach a conclusion, it transforms the purpose of research to a pluriverse of purposes. And so what do we mean when we say participatory design or research? And it goes by many names. You'll see collaborative or cooperative or co-design. And usually people mean one of four things that I've seen, right? One is just participation. If I interview someone, they are a research participant, therefore they are participating, therefore I am doing participatory work. Some people mean a method. Are you going to do a usability test or a trend analysis? No, I'm going to do participatory design. Some people mean a way of doing a method. We have these program managers and we're trying to design a program. Let's do a design studio. Oh, but we could also do it by inviting people, the community that will benefit from the program, into the process. And other people mean a methodology, by which I mean a collection of methods or a particular set of guiding philosophies, guidelines that help you to choose a particular method at a particular point in a process, right? And it'll say, do A, do step B, do step C, and then bring the community in at step D, and then do these specific activities, E, F, and G, with the community members. Now, whether you mean participation, method, way of doing a method, or methodology, in all of these types of ways, the designer or the researcher, the program manager, or portfolio director is centered, right? And we don't mean anything bad by it. I'm a designer, I'm a researcher, I help direct things, and I'm trying to empower people, right? I want the community to be empowered. But remember, when we empower people, we're actually reconstructing and reinforcing the hierarchy that we seek to subvert. If we have a participatory workshop on Monday with the community, we have another one on Wednesday, do you know what we're doing on Tuesday? What are we doing? We're looking at the outcomes of workshop number one and seeing what information from that will carry over to workshop number two on Wednesday. We're trying to see if the outcomes of workshop one align with the vision and the goals of the entire workshop series. We're trying to see if any new information sprouted up in workshop number one that sends workshop two in a new direction. All of this evaluation, interpretation, decision-making, and sense-making is happening without any of the community members present. As much as we try to neutralize the power of facilitation, we have to realize that facilitation is power. So instead of the designer as facilitator model or researcher facilitator model, in radical participatory design, we use a different model. The model is designer as community member, or researcher as community member, or program manager as community member. And what does that mean? That means that this person, that you, that I, that we sit equal to and alongside all of the other community members on this team. And it means that the gifts and skills that we have, the skills of design or research or evaluation, impact analysis, sit equal to and alongside all of the talents, gifts, skills, abilities, and giftings of all of the other community members on the team. We move to a model of community member as designer or community member as researcher, which is self-explanatory, but you would be surprised at how many co-design methods I know that don't actually allow the community members to actually design. And the third one is community member as facilitator, because if you change who facilitates, you change the outcome. Radical participatory design, in my experience, and both experience and observation, has three characteristics. Number one, the community members are always present and always leading. There are no meetings, no preparation, no phone calls apart from them because they are full-fledged members on the team. Number two, they usually outnumber the professional designers or whatever the professionals are. And number three, they own the data, the outcomes, artifacts, as well as the narratives around the data, outcomes, and artifacts. I usually ask three questions. Who is initiating? Who is participating? And who is leading? So in community design, it's just the community, just them. They initiate, they do the work, they lead, it's just them. In community-driven design, regardless of who initiates the project, the community may invite a designer to help at a particular point. Maybe they invite an architect because they're doing some placemaking project and they want to get some checks to see if this makes sense. But they are always leading, no matter how much they might bring in designers to participate. Now, in what I call colonial participatory design, oftentimes we call participatory design, regardless of who initiates, designers or professionals might allow community members to participate and come into the process, but we never ever reach any type of equitable co-leadership because the designers or the professionals are always leading. And instead, when I say radical participatory design, I mean a design or work in which, regardless of who initiates, the community members are always participating and always leading up to and inclusive of equal participation or equitable co-leadership. This challenges the research justice model in which lived experiential and cultural and spiritual and mainstream institutional knowledge are equal. By the way, when I say mainstream institutional knowledge, that's the knowledge you get from books and college and universities and lectures and the type of knowledge that you might learn when you're in a degree program or a boot camp. In reality, what we say in radical participatory design is that no, lived experiential knowledge is greater than mainstream institutional knowledge. Why do I say that? Well, number one, mainstream institutional knowledge is usually studying lived experiential knowledge. We go to a particular community, we do a study, then we write a book about how people live or what people do, which says to me that lived experiential knowledge is always ahead of mainstream institutional knowledge, which is always studying the community knowledge, the relational knowledge, the embodied knowledge, the intuitive knowledge, the aesthetic knowledge, the emotional knowledge, the lived experiential knowledge, right? But secondly, it's very, very, very difficult to solve issues. Pretend you're a medical doctor, right? And you have this mainstream institutional textbook, medical school knowledge. Someone comes to you and they don't share anything of their lived experience. You don't know anything of how it hurts and when it hurts and where it hurts if there's a hurting issue. It's very difficult for you to solve that issue. In fact, there's an entire TV show called House in which this superstar diagnostician actually sent his medical fellows to break into the homes of patients with really, really rare, strange situations, medical situations, but who weren't divulging full information. But we know that our bodies are attuned to certain things to give us information to tell us what to do. Not for every sickness or every situation, but in many, so you can tell if you're dehydrated, you need more water, or maybe you're hungry, maybe you need to sleep more. Even think of a woman in labor, right? There are certain positions, as the woman is moving around in labor, there are certain positions that have less pain than others. And usually those positions are the ones that are most conducive to the delivery of the baby. So when you think about all this information that I'm saying, I want you to also think about the benefits of radical participatory design or research or participatory work. And in fact, I'll use two examples as I walk through some of those benefits. I had a digital literacy project in North Central India, and this is part of the team here. And it had different parts. There was a part about teaching people to build web apps and mobile apps and teaching system admin and DevOps things. But there was a component based just on digital literacy and how can you use the internet to improve your life and improve how you live, right? So I'm going to focus on that. And this is an example of a project that I would call a success. Let me show you an example of another one as well. International Summer Service Learning Program in Washington, D.C. We were redesigning this program. And this is an example that I would say failed. And I have a lot more failures than successes. And I'm going to use these as an example. This was done not for a multinational company like the digital literacy one. This one was done for a nonprofit in town working with the local school district. So let's talk about the benefits. The first is that we don't worry about inclusive design. We focus on an inclusive team in Radical Participatory Design. When I have the actual team being inclusive of the community in a qualitatively representative way, what happens? It means that inclusive research, inclusive recruitment, ultimately inclusive design is expedited and facilitated because these people have long-term relationships and networks. So if you look at the last column on the right, that's me. I'm doing a homestay and a contextual immersion, right? But the rest of the team is split up in two, and they're going into these communities where they have connections and established community, and they can build upon that, and it helps reduce anxiety, and they're more able to be let in by the community. Number two, the best way, in my opinion, the easiest way, the most fundamental way to do human-centered design, to truly center any design on the human in all phases of the work, is to do radical participatory design, because in all phases of the work, the community whom you're trying to center is on the team. In fact, when you do this, what I found is that we often move beyond human-centered design with communities, right? We move to community-centered or society-centered design, or even life-centered and planet-centered design. So this is an example. I took away the information just so you can see some of the categories of this school project, where people were trying to look at compost needs and building needs and plant needs beyond just people needs. I had this trans-local national project about water, and I want you to look at the design challenge, which says this: ensure a safe, sustainable, equitable, and affordable drinking water future. Now, from our anthropocentric ears, we might think, oh yeah, that's about people, but actually this wasn't. This was much wider. When it says equitable, when it says sustainable, when it says safe, that's talking about plants, that's talking about the topography and the rocks and hills, that's talking about all of the planet, right? Affordable as well, because the costs fall on all of us, not just the humans. Number three, radical participatory design doesn't worry about empathy. Forget it, it's an impossibility. And I know that's a bit provocative, but there is I found one social work paper that actually said this, that due to the actual inherent hierarchy between the patient and the client, empathy is an impossibility. Now, normally when we say empathy, we're talking about intellectual empathy, knowing what someone is going through. But rarely are we talking about feeling what they're going through, emotional empathy, or being moved to act, compassionate empathy based on that emotional empathy, which comes out of that intellectual empathy. And most people think of these three empathies as three different types of empathies, whereas I think of it as three components of empathy, meaning that I need all three of them to say that I have empathy. In fact, one of the most difficult parts about truly exemplifying, embodying, and exuding empathy is the fact that compassionate empathy is an impossibility. Well, why is that? I do not know if I would have been moved to act outside of this financial relationship in which someone is paying me to do this work. Oh, Victor, what about that pro bono and that volunteer project that we did last week and a month ago? Okay, right, maybe you're not getting money, but there's still an agreement that you're coming in to do something, to assess the situation, and to hopefully help in moving forward, providing a solution, enabling or enacting a goal or a vision. So we don't know if we would have done that apart from or outside of that, and it makes it an impossibility. Instead, in radical participatory design, I don't worry about that, because empathy is embodied in a sustained and sustainable way. I'm not mapping personas. These are the students in that international summer service program mapping their own personas, their own experiences, where they know that they have been. Number four, trauma responsive design is more likely to happen when you're doing radical participatory design. And I don't mean this flippantly at all. Definitely, we still engage in trauma responsive practices, right? But when you look at these elements, right, of collaboration and mutuality and peer support, these elements are actually quite naturally embedded in a radical participation of the community. So in the digital literacy project, when we were doing observations, we were able to do these observations in ways that did not trigger people. Why? Because people on the team had been through the experience and they knew what it was like and how to do it in such a way that it wouldn't trigger people. When we do radical participatory design, you're more likely to do research through design or design through research or just do whatever, because people don't have the mainstream institutional knowledge of this is the methodology and you do this step and this is the right way to do it. So you might be doing some design when you're doing research, right? So in the digital literacy project, we prototype something and we're sharing it and we're working it. Now, yes, prototyping in a research phase might have a different purpose than prototyping in a design phase, but we're not bound to certain mainstream institutional constructs, and we're free to open up and experiment. Systems practice, a really beautiful practice, often happens much more naturally and many more times when we're doing radical participatory design, often because the communities that I work with, especially the ones who often are underserved and underutilized and are at the bottom of social hierarchy, have a special vision or insight to the different levels, because they have to be able to engage with people at different levels, and they also know their own level. And so we are often doing this type of systems work. So here's a systems map for one of my projects where we're studying generational racialized trauma in the rural South. And I can talk more about that in the Q&R, question and response, if you'd like to talk about that. In radical participatory design, I'm stumbling over my words, I'm sorry. We often are doing pluriversal and futures design. When I say pluriversal design, I'm thinking of, can we not have a pluralistic understanding of what the good life means? Why does what good life for you have to mean the same thing that it means for me? Can we have countries develop around the world in ways that don't always involve establishing a McDonald's in the center? And so it's this move away from damage-centered, problem-based, deficit-based, need-based to asset-based methodologies. And why does it happen that when you do radical participatory design, you're often moving to asset-based methodologies? It's because communities love to define themselves by what they have, not by what they lack. So when you look at the International Summer Service Learning Program, the students are mapping different pathways through a program, not based on some lack or some deficiency, but based on who they want to become and be when they grow up. And all of this sounds great and it's beautiful, but how do you do it ethically? And I'm not going to talk about data and consent and privacy. These are huge concerns, and we can talk about this at the end, but really I want to focus in on two things: equality and equity. Equality, as we know, says if two people of differing abilities, right, are coming together and doing the exact same thing, if two people of different genders are doing the exact same thing, we pay them the same. We should pay them the same. We have work to do to get there, right? But oftentimes, even though I, as a professional designer, or we as professionals in whatever our role is, are doing the same thing as the people in the communities we're inviting in to do, they're giving up time away from a job, two jobs, no job, but time they could be using to find a job. And so their time is much more valuable than our time. And in those cases, equity says they should be paid more. In that respect, we failed when you look at the International Summer Service Learning Program, right? Because the students were not paid. Oh, wait, Victor, but you and that other professional researcher, you two weren't paid as well. You're right. We weren't paid as well. So it was equal, but it was still unethical. They should have been paid for the time. And furthermore, from an equity standpoint, not paying us had a much bigger effect on the students than it had on my professional research and design colleague and myself. And a lot of people will say, well, it's very difficult. How do you pay? I don't have the funding. And I just want to expand our minds for a moment about the many different ways. So putting aside money, I just want to talk about all the other ways in the digital literacy project people were compensated. They each received breakfast, they received lunch. And if we ever had anything that went tonight, a special ceremony, an event, if we did travel, because we did travel to different places, they received dinner, room, board, travel expenses. If they wanted and everyone didn't want to, they became first-time authors. If they wanted and everyone didn't want to, they became second-time authors. They received referrals, references, recommendations. Every time I came back to the same region to test out a new educational product or service, I reached out to them to see if they wanted to be part of the first people to try it out. The main point here is not what you do, but it's that they decide what they want or how they want to be compensated. And if ever in doubt, give money, because that allows them to figure it out, as opposed to a gift card where you're narrowing the choices. So lastly, as you think about all this and doing this ethically, you might want to say, well, how do I evaluate it? And why would I even want to evaluate it, right? Well, this is the question I ask myself and we ask ourselves when we do this work. Have a majority of the design and research team members experience a sustained and sustainable shift in power? Let me say that one more time. Have a majority of the design and research team members experience a sustained and sustainable shift in power? Unfortunately, the answer to that question in the International Summer Service Learning Project was no. And this is one of the reasons why we have this question evaluation, because it can seem like you're doing radical participatory design, and then maybe you're not. We had this beautiful work that we'd done, and we did this research, and we started prototyping what this new program, educational program, and that, you know, they would go overseas over the summer and do work with communities. They come back and do this social entrepreneurship projects and locally, and we were making it better. We thought we were. And when we had this beautiful new design, the nonprofit came and said, no, we don't want to do that. And you see what they were saying is that you thought we had given up power, because that's what radical participatory design is about. We cede power. We don't empower. We just give up power, and the community assumes it. You thought we had given up power, but actually we didn't. We were just waiting to see what you did. And if we didn't like it, we would come back in and reassert ourselves. And that's what happened. So the power relationships that existed before and after the project remain exactly the same. But if I go to the digital literacy project, you know, there were lots of components: service design, product design, business design, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on, and hundreds of thousands in Bangladesh reach a certain level of digital literacy, and tens of millions women in rural villages in India and different places of Colombia, South Africa, Mexico, et cetera. I could talk about that. But ultimately, I want you to look at the team. Because they would say because of this experience, one of the team members became a product manager, another became a project manager, another an engineer, another a designer, another was already an instructional designer, but received a promotion because of this work. Another said, that's fine that you all are doing that. I don't want to do that. I like selling flowers. I'm just going to keep selling flowers. And that's what that person did, although that person's business was benefited by the work. And in fact, I invited 3 people who were not engineering or product managers or designers or any of that type of stuff, but they were sales and marketing, to be a part of the team to help diversify. Every single one of those 3 people quit their job within a year, and they knew they were going to do it by the end of the project. I quit my job by the end of the year, and I knew I was going to do it by the end of this project. 100% of this team experienced a shift in power, whether giving up power or assuming more power. In futures work, one of the things we ask ourselves is this question: what are possible futures, possible scenarios? And one of the dreams I have is this: imagine a world in which the United States government, the country in which I live, says, you know what, all of the products and services that we from now on create are going to be created through radical participatory design. And this ushers in a new future of work in which people from all walks of life come into government and they gain these skills in doing this work. And some of them take those skills and they go out and get other jobs with it. Others remain in government continuing to do this. And one of those projects actually is a policy design project. And one of those projects works on creating this new planet-centered value creation law that says, no matter where you are, nonprofits, for-profits, you must use participatory design in your work towards better planet health. And so for-profits now who are behind because the government was leading jump in and have to do the work, and nonprofits as well. But unfortunately, some of these for-profits actually engage in colonial participatory design. So in futures, we ask ourselves this: is this a future that's preferred, the future that you want, or are there components of this future that you like or prefer? And if so, what are the strategies you take, the methods you employ? What decisions do you make to make that future or the components of the future that you prefer more likely to happen? So I'm doing a number of different things. Normally I would stop the talk there. I'm just going to mention 2 things. One, I'm working at the policy level. And I know Melinda and Preeti are going to put it in the chat. I worked on a policy level. I went through a policy accelerator, worked collaboratively to create a policy memo that I'm now shopping around the government. I've talked with the White House, and I'm trying to get the government to bring in participatory design, radical participation into the design of products, services, any government-funded research and policy. And we can talk more about that. But 2, I'm also shopping around and talking with people to say, hey, you know, do you want to try to create an example project to begin to build up momentum? But 3, I'm working on an awards, and we're hoping to launch it next year, the Participatory Government Awards, or Participatory Design in Government. So projects in which people are doing government work, but they're doing it through participation, and beginning to honor those places and spaces where people are doing this really, really important work, whether they're known or not known, or famous or not famous. We want to honor that because we want to see that and be the change that we want to see. So I've created a form, and if you want to be a part of supporting that, when that starts, the idea was just get 10 people every year. I'm talking a little bit, I'm just going to finish really quick. 10 people every year to give $100 a month who are willing to do that, right? And that at the end of the year, each person is given $1,200. that adds up to 12,000. But I thought, well, there might be people who want to give more, there might be people who want to give less. So we want to invite other people who want to participate as well. So, but at a minimum, we're going to have $12,000 that we're going to be giving out to award and honor people who are doing this really, really important work of aligning the needs of the people with the needs of the government of the people. So thank you for this time, and I'm ready to go to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Victor. We already have one question in chat, and also besides chat, feel free to use the reactions and raise your hand if you would like to come on mic and ask your question this way.
All right, so our question from Pari in the chat is, where or when is it the hardest to activate participatory radical design? As our planet's health declines, does it get harder or easier? So a little bit of a two-parter there. Victor, what are your thoughts?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I fully understand. So in a project, the later you do it, the worse it is, because that means you've made more and more decisions before you bring them in. So the earlier, the better. But if you just mean generally like geological time, yeah, it gets harder. Some people, some community members have lost hope.
Yes.
Some community members have been harmed and hurt, and they don't want to participate or interact. And so now you have to deal with that challenge. And so had they been brought in earlier, when I say earlier periods, earlier epics, etc., before some of that happened, it would have been easier. But now some people have lost hope. Some people don't want to engage. Some people don't trust you, and so it's much, much harder as more and more harm comes to the planet and all creation. But feel free, if you have a comment as well. You don't have to have just a question, or if you want to respond to that question.
I guess my comment there is it argues then, Victor, for the need for this as the planet continues to decline, right? It becomes more important, not less. Anyway, yeah, this is just a fascinating and wonderful conversation. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your work on this. It's fabulous.
Thanks for your question and comment. Appreciate it.
All right, we have a question from Scott in the chat. We know that communities are not monolithic, so how do you reconcile differences in lived experience from community members that may conflict from each other?
Yeah, I think that it's not, well, maybe it is a little different, but I would say you don't escape the problems that you would have in any type of work process. So you can have conflicts without the community members, and you can have conflicts with the community members. So this is something that you still have to navigate. You'll never graduate away from that type of challenge or issue. The question is, how do you resolve conflicts, and how do you do it in a way that's equitable, that values every voice? And there are some interesting models which we don't have the time to really go into. But remember, like, I think one of the interesting things is that we tend to think of in democratic countries or in regions that aspire to democracy, that voting in which a majority wins is a fair thing, right? But there's a history of people in the minority who have grievances. Well, how do I get my needs met, or how do I get my vision enacted if I'm always in the minority and things always get voted a different way? So there are some other ways, and I have some projects where I'm working on something called a biocracy, where our decision making isn't something that is like people pitted against each other, but it's an emergent, decisions emerge in the way that different parts of the body have different functions and they work together, and it has this kind of collective decision making that happens. And I could talk a little bit more about that, but yes, you have to do that. Managing conflicts must be done. The big thing, if I could say any one thing to that question, is the assumption, and I think this is the assumption that underlines all of the tough questions with radical participatory design and criticism, is that you, the designer, have to do it. In radical participatory design, remember that you're not facilitating, right? So the burden isn't only on you. you don't have to carry the burden of making sure everyone's happy and making sure we get through conflict. That should be held on the burden is on the entire community and the entire group that's there. It's, again, a collective leadership. So it's learning to let go, and making sure you address that as one of many, as one of the community members, as a person alongside everyone else.
Thank you, Victor. We have a number of questions coming in, and also folks should absolutely feel free to get on the mic and ask aloud. I'll read Nina's question here. Do you have any examples from your work at NASA where you are using this approach or introducing this approach?
Nina, do you mean radical participatory design, or do you mean the biocracy?
Yeah, the participatory model.
Oh, yeah. So at NASA, I pay, so the lawyers are not comfortable with me paying people apart from a contract. So the way that we get around that is we pay contractors and contractors pay people. So we have a customer participatory team, but it's through a contractor. And so I have an employee participatory team because I'm doing service design. I work on both improving the employee experience as well as the customer experience. But it's really interesting. Like if you came to one of our sessions, I don't think you could tell who is, and I'm the only one, who's the one person who has a design in their title or innovation special. I don't even know what they call me, but who's that person? Because you would see different people leading it. And one of the really cool things is when you see like questions, people are like, oh, I'm not sure how to do this. The questions don't all come to me. I think one of the things, this relates a little bit to someone else's question that I saw, the last question from Angelica. The questions are often about things that design has nothing to say, or innovation or technology has nothing to say. It's about like the program expertise, the lived experience of the small businesses and the research institutions and the women-owned small businesses that we're trying to help. And the people who know that aren't the person who just got hired, who's a design or innovation expert. It's those companies and those businesses and those researchers at these research institutions and these minority-owned small businesses and the employees and staff who've been working on this for so long. So they often get the questions way more than I do about trying to understand something or what are some of the best ways. So it's a really interesting experience. So yeah, I do it there.
Thank you.
All right, and now we have this combo question. I'll share Rhett and Angelica's. What are some strategies you've used successfully to make a case for RPD if those at the top are not bought in on investing in it? And if you have anything else to add about making the case for RPD with design professionals who feels like it undermines their knowledge.
Yeah, those are big questions. So I'll start backwards. For design professionals, and you're right, it's not just like executives. Design professionals don't. It's like a tough thing. The thing here is to practice what indigenous systems thinker Melanie Goodchild calls two-eyed seeing. I often say multi-eyed seeing. So instead of thinking, oh, we got to do this kind of community thing, and they're the people with expertise, or oh, the designers are the people with expertise. The point is, what we're saying is we're bringing them together. And together, you're much more powerful. So when you do radical participatory design, we don't say we do it and the designer is not there. They're there. But the way it kind of functions, I don't know the best way to explain it, but it's as if you went, imagine you're hanging out with your friends. It's non-work related. And you're like, hey, let's take a trip. And you just plan a trip. No one, well, maybe this does happen, but in my case, no one says, Victor, you lead us, you plan the trip. It's more just like you're just planning the trip. Now, what happens? Someone might say, oh, wait a minute, Victor, don't you read a lot of art history? What art places should we go? So when a question comes up that they feel is relevant to the skills you bring, they pull it in. But it's very different than you leading the process as the art historian or whatever. So it's that's the kind of experience that it feels like. Your design is still needed. But there are many ways in the pluriverse of designing, not just the ways that we've been taught in Western society. There are many understandings of research. And so we're bringing those and saying they're equal. So you are an expert if you are a design expert. You are an expert. The only thing I'm saying is that so are these people. If you can be an expert in a certain kind of knowledge, and somebody else can be an expert in living experiential knowledge, etc. That's all. And I like to say expertise more than voice, because when you say bring in their voice, it doesn't acknowledge that they have an expertise as well. So I like to say that. The second part of the question was, how do you make the case? That's a long question, and there are lots of strategies that I try to do. But let me say this. A lot of times when I talk with groups or meet with groups, I see some people who like don't do participatory design at all. And they're like, okay, I want to do that. How do I do that? And I'm like, whoa, 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 slow down. You don't want to go straight from A to Z. Just ask yourself, on this project that you're working on, or the next project, what's one thing you can do to further move in a more participatory direction? That's the thing. What I'm presenting is a pragmatic ideal, right? It is achievable, but it's still a guiding star. Now, with that as your guiding star, let's start making steps to move in that direction. And then it's not as daunting, right? You're just asking yourself, how can I begin to involve them more? How can I involve them earlier? How, you know what I'm saying? And so lots of ways. It's much easier to convince people to do that, like one notch or one increase towards that, 1 degree more towards that, before, instead of trying to go all the way. Now, again, if you don't go all the way, is there still inequity? Yeah, it's one of the things that people say. Well, you still haven't done what I needed. You still haven't, brought me in and paid and been equitable. So that is something to think about as well. And I've seen lots of people say, okay, we won't start until we can at least do it equitably, right? So we're paying people for their time in equitable ways. But there's lots. There's like, hey, the 5 whys approach. And then, why do you want to do it this way? Why do you want to? And finally, they tell you it's because of this. And you say, hey, if I could get to this, but I get there in a different way, a different method, would you be okay with that? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. But if they say yes, then boom, you got a way to do it. Sometimes I try to use participatory design or radical participatory design for a piece of something. So executives like want to do something, and I say, hey, can we just take a moment? Let's do an hour session and map out the assumptions. Do an assumption slam. So we map it out, 2x2 matrix. We look at the riskiest assumptions that we know the least about, that are most critical. Like if they're not true, this project or thing will fail. And you say, could you give us a week to test those out? And if they're fine, we've just lost a week. But if we find out they're not true, we've saved X amount of money and X amount, of hours of employees' time. So, sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. And so you go do that, but you do it in a radically participatory way, right? Another thing, I can say many of these, I'll just mention one more because I know we have short on time. It's much easier for people to see and allow and be willing to try radical participatory work on an internal project first. So doing it on employee experience, I want to improve the onboarding experience for employees, et cetera, they're much more willing to do that. And then when they can see that, they might then kind of be willing to try it. Or you might have to build up a portfolio of internal projects, and then you're able to do that. So it's always about the trying to find a project that is big enough that it might mean something if it works, but small enough that it's under the radar that people will allow you to do it. Or a bunch of small projects that together they're able to show credence of the idea.
I liked what you said, Victor, about a piece. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, when you're bringing in people into a kind of a participatory design project like this, and we want to give space to folks from those communities to lead, are there instances where you feel that they may not feel they have the experience to, or like the same design language that, and maybe not the confidence to be able to lead? And like, is there a way, like as the designer, do you like transition, like you start like, hey, this is how it goes, or how I might think of doing it, but maybe that gives them ideas? Or how does that transition work in getting them to a place where they're comfortable with doing that?
It's a beautiful question. There was a slide that I had where, I don't know if you saw me, I gave different assets and skills and abilities to the different community members. And one of the reasons I do that is because sometimes we assume they don't have the skills. They're this empty slate and they're just going to learn. But participatory design, even if it's not radical, one of the purposes or benefits is mutual, bi-directional, multi-directional learning. So you should be learning something as well by having that lived experience on the team. So 2 things I might say. One, you might do participatory asset mapping. Let's map our assets as a team, what we have, what we know. And then people sometimes are like, oh, yeah, you're right. I do that in my job. All right. I do that in my community. I didn't think about it. So it's kind of like that. Okay, well, okay, I'll try it. So starting out by doing that. But I've also done, Scott, what you're hinting at, and thank you for asking, is the transition. So someone's not comfortable, no one's comfortable facilitating. So I start, and we do this model of, at the beginning of the project, I'm facilitating, and people who are interested are observing and learning, or maybe no one's interested at the moment. Then by the middle, we're kind of co-facilitating. And by the end, I say the end, but the end of this transition period, I'm observing and they're facilitating. And I might, because I am a community member, at least in this project, I might still facilitate something like someone else might. It rotates and moves around, but I'm not the only one, and I do it just as much as everyone else. So there is a transition period where I do, we do, you do, kind of thing.
Got it. Thank you.
Zachary, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Zachary and Toyin. I was curious if the slides are going to be available afterwards. I think that was just asked in the chat, but the reason why I ask is that I came to Civic Tech like after researching participatory budgeting and participatory governance, because I was like, it seems like the sort of human-centered design that I was interested in and that I thought participatory budgeting achieved in our democratic practices is something that had already been rooted or was rooted in Civic Tech. And so I was like, oh, I should work here so that I can help those like grow into other areas. And so I sort of like keep an eye on participatory budgeting work across the country. And a lot of the things that I saw in the presentation sort of like, there are like direct parallels. Participatory, not being the only thing like in the title. But yeah, are the slides going to be made available? Because I'd love to take a deeper look at some of these things and connect it to some other participatory like budgeting work that I know that's happening around me.
Yes, they will.
Great. Thank you so
Send
much.
out an email. Mm-hmm. And we have another question from Perry, and then I think we'll be getting close to wrapping up. And did I pronounce your name right? I think so. The question is, what about situations where the group have articulated a need for an external party to give them anonymity or direction? Often people do this in order to give less powerful members of the group a more powerful voice in establishments where participatory is frowned upon.
Yeah, and this is kind of where, in a lot of indigenous cultures, and even in some non-indigenous cultures, there's this idea or character called the trickster, right, in stories, which is able to have a type of playful methodology and move and shift, shape-shifting and changing forms. And so this brings up for me the idea of the trickster, in that you have to be able to balance the local or community definition of equality, equity, fairness, and participation, even decision making, with the idea of trying to have people participate. And so normally what people will say, I think it's like, oh, okay, well, there's, either we do radical participatory design or participatory design, or we do it the way this community does it. And usually there's never just two choices. I'll often say, when faced with two choices, make a third, make a fourth, make a fifth, right? So there are ways, but it takes some creativity to figure out how do we get participation, but still do it in locally appropriate ways. Because I think sometimes people think, okay, the purpose of this is to change the world. Well, maybe down the line, ultimately, but no, we don't have that power. That sounds bad. The main purpose of this is how do I, as a designer or a researcher or some kind of professional, change the power that I exude in this process right here? If I could do that in everything and every project I do, the rest will take care of itself. So this is what I have control of, because I'm the powerful one in this hierarchy. So we're focusing here on this process and what we're doing. So yes, there are lots of ways and ways to reconcile, to bring the two together, to still be appropriate within a particular culture or group. And that doesn't have to be like a ethnographic culture. It could be like an organizational culture, et cetera, but still bring in participation. So you just have to be crafty.
That's great. Thank you, Victor. I know we're getting close on time, so we will take a collective deep breath, and it's a lot to think about. I know we're all feeling a blend of inspired and terrified in terms of how this applies. At least I am. I appreciate it so much, your candor and the candor of others here. And I'm just really grateful to have been here with all of you. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, and as you probably saw in those photos that Victor shared, Victor's a pro at fun, candid group photos to wrap up deep sessions. So if you're up for it, stay on camera for a minute for a quick photo. I'm going to let Krithi get us set up on that. If you're not, don't worry about it. Leave your video off. No biggie. But we would love to be able to celebrate this time here. It'll probably be shared. So if you're not wanting that shared, just leave your camera off. All right, everybody get ready. Are you ready, Krithi? 1, 2, 3, RPD. Awesome. Thank you everyone for being here. And I think Krithi will drop a couple of links more about our organization. We are going to be doing more demo days. So if you know people who are doing awesome work that should be sharing here, point them our way. You can go visit our website at publicgood.tech and find out all about how to become a member, how to keep up with events. And we have a great active Slack community that has careers, topics, conversation. It's always popping about something. So please join us over there, and thank you all for being here. And thank you, Victor, so much. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.